Black Rifle Coffee, baby. Breeding fuel.
Let's fire this thing up. Let's go. Has it been running this whole time?
Started a few minutes ago.
Okay. Braxton, it's good to have you here, man.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So tell me one thing about your life that was completely unexpected from the time that you were 18 until now that you would be like, what the fuck?
Boy, there's been a lot of what the fucks in
Yeah.
that time. I got wounded real bad. I knew. I mean, I knew it was. It wasn't like we knew what we were doing,
Right?
You know, it wasn't like it kind of shocked me, but that I didn't think. I for sure. You know, when you go over, I mean, you're downrange a lot more than me. You think about kind of living and dying. You never really think about getting like fucked up,
Right?
You know, I always thought I'd do it. First time I broke my back was on a bull. That was. I was like 16 or something.
Seriously?
Yeah. So I was used to like, I think I'd broke some like 60 bones before I ever joined, some crazy shit like that.
60 bones before you joined?
Yeah, well, I mean, riding colts and bulls and motorcycles and just being a general dumbass, you know. So I kind of, you know, I'd been hurt a bunch, but I did not think about like one day I might be 20 and never going to walk kind of thing, you know? So I guess that would probably be the most startling thing. I met a woman who's great. That's another shocker. I didn't think that would happen, but I don't know. I don't know there's too many more. I've kind of expected a lot of the stupid shit that's happened.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Where were you deployed?
Ramadi.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, 05. I got wounded the first 06.
06? Mm-hmm. Who were you with?
Triple Deuce out of Utah. The second, 2 of the 22nd.
Okay.
Triple Deuce. I got their artillery battalion.
Okay.
Just volunteered on.
Yeah.
Jumped on with them.
Yeah, it's so interesting because like I was explaining this to my wife. It was like combat and like the multiple repetitions in combat, and then you psychologically you pass through a threshold where you're like, okay, well, I know I'm gonna either die or live, but you're just kind of okay with the reality until you're addressing the painful reality of a situation.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, I've at least accomplished it and then moved on. But I guess my question is like, when dealing with an injury and then coming back, like what are the things that you've done to help yourself psychologically? Because it's like just getting injured is hard enough, but when you think about like a combat injury, it's even
Sure. For me, it's still horses. I've been, you know, I've been around horses since 4 years old or so. They, especially young horses, they really, they make me focus on them. You know what I mean? I can't sit and live in my own head. I have to be paying attention to them. And I think that probably helps a lot. Watching them develop, you know, I like the whole process. This last time I broke my back again in July of last year in my hip. And
What'd you break?
The transverse process on, I forget which vertebrae, but snap that sucker right off. It's just floating in there.
Seriously?
Yeah. I got a rod in my hip and I bent that fucker. So this last injury, it's been like, I haven't been able to ride a colt for, I don't know, 6 or 8 months. And it's been a lot of thinking like, holy shit, I might have to kind of, you know, I got young kids and might have to kind of start over.
Yeah.
Like get smarter, I guess. So it's been a little worrisome in that, you know, I try not to like live in Iraq in my head or anything, but starting over with life, sometimes I wonder, you know, how that process is going to be. You know what I mean? Like if I don't have that thing to distract me that I'm like really in love with, but you know, I'm fine otherwise. It's just, I wonder is what I'm trying to say because it's working for now, but I don't know if it's always gonna.
No, I get that. Like I don't understand horses necessarily. I don't understand them at all. But I do see a lot of guys finding a lot of therapy, specifically connecting in with. I don't want to call it like therapy because I like some of this is just it's not. It's just work.
Right.
I think hard work is actually therapy in a lot of different ways, but they find some different connection with the animal that is almost spiritual for some reason. I don't know. Help me understand that. I don't know what's
so I love, sorry to cut you off.
Yeah, please.
I love my dogs, but with horses, every time you get on one, you and he or she are trusting each other in a way that you just don't with dogs. Cause that horse can kill me.
Yeah.
And I can do something real stupid and get him killed real easy too. So you guys kind of bond, you have to bond in a certain way. There's just a level of trust that's not there with other animals, you know? I guess if you rode your dog, maybe it'd be similar. Yeah, like my best horse died last year unexpectedly in my lap. It sucked.
Really? How?
Well, she twisted a gut, and it took me probably 6 months to be able to talk about it without getting teary. And I'm not like a big crier,
right?
But that was a tough one.
How long did you have her?
She was only 7, and I started her, so I had her for 5 years before she died.
Right.
I must have roped 150 colts off of her, though. You know, we worked together every day.
Right.
And everything. I think there's just the trust bond is different, you know. So,
yeah. What is there a big difference between the breed of horse and the demeanor that they carry? Mm-hmm. So what's your preferred?
Well, I'm getting older, so I probably ought to get on less rank stuff, but I've rode quarter horses my whole life. Old man, you know, he raised them down in Utah here. And so quarter horses still, but the draft, my daughter's got a half draft horse. That's actually, I got bucked off another half draft is how I got busted up this last time, but they're way more gentle normally.
What is a draft horse? Is it, explain to me like
working horses, like Clydesdales, Percherons,
right? That
kind of thing. And usually they'll cross with a quarter horse, and you get a half draft or quarter draft. They're really good in Brandon pens. I mean, they can drag calves all freaking day long. Great in the mountains, but mentally they're way more docile.
Really,
by nature and generally. So Percherons, I had a Percheron cross filly. Gosh, what was this? 3-4 years ago. She was a bitch, man. but most of the time, they're pretty easy going. She just wasn't. And they're stronger too. Everything, like when you're roping them, even when they're young and they're the same size as like a quarter horse, they're so much stronger. I mean, it is incredible. When they'll pull, so pound for pound.
Is it just torque or is it speed too?
They're usually slow.
They're just got more strength.
They're strong. And I think a lot of it is like tendon and bone structure. They're just strong as hell. Where quarter horses are more athletic and I mean, it's what they're bred for. You know, it's a uniquely American horse, you know, the quarter horse. And so that's probably part of my, you know, I happen to like this country.
Right, yeah.
Like some people who share my political values, or views, I'm sorry. And so maybe I'm a little bit biased. You know, we created them and they're pretty freaking cool.
So we created the quarter horse?
Yeah.
So how, explain to me how those genetic lines put together, because I don't get it.
The Texans are not going to like hearing this, but it actually mostly happened to like Boston area. So the Spaniards left their horses here, right? And then over on the East Coast, they were mostly, you know, riding thoroughbreds and stuff, very English people over there. And so some people around Boston started breeding these Spanish horses to them, they're Mustangs, what they are now, but they start breeding them and crossing, trying to get these shorter, faster horses, because on the weekends, usually like Friday, Saturday, that kind of thing, they were doing quarter-mile races and betting. So these guys were like trying to get shorter, faster horses. And then Texans somewhere around, you know, somewhere around like 1880 or so, the Texans finally figured out these things were pretty good at ranch work. And so that's kind of how they they ended up, the horse they are now is mostly known as a ranch horse, at least out here. And so then, you know, you're selecting for traits and breeding. I mean, these horses probably don't hardly resemble the ones from 150 years ago at all.
Right.
But that's the sort of the genesis.
So is a quarter horse, is it named from that quarter? Okay, so it's named from the quarter track or quarter mile. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. I've never known that. Jamie, who works for us, she's like, we always refer to her as the horse lady because she's got all she does that. My daughter's been taking riding lessons for the last couple of years.
Cool.
Because I think it's good. I think it's good for kids just to, like, one, overcome fear, work with animals, like treats them, you know, gives them confidence. I can't help her do that in the sense of, like, I don't know anything about horses.
Sure.
We had horses growing up, but I never, after a certain age, I never got into it. Like, it was more of my grandfather's thing. My dad's thing was like logging equipment.
Yeah, he collected steels or something.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Versus me, I'm like, I think, I was making this joke the other day. I was like, I think we should be riding cows more, like training them, because at least if I have a disagreement with them, I'd feel better about eating them.
Well, in a different time, there's some horses I'd eat for sure. That I got one right now. I wouldn't mind. The laws kind of prevent it, but.
You can't eat horses?
Well, you can.
I thought the Obama administration passed that like a few years ago, where they were like, you can eat your horses now or something.
You can. I think there's like 16 states where it's legal. It's not federally illegal, but it's so heavily regulated. It's
right.
It's like not easy to. Mexicans do it, so you know, like they don't care. So I don't think I don't think like the FBI is going to come kick down your door if you shoot a horse you hate. But yeah,
that's fair. Man, still beef is pretty damn good. It'd be hard to like pass that up for a horse. Right. I ate camel a few years ago and it was delicious. We had this like, it was so good, man. Like maybe it was just because we were fucking hungry. That could be it too. But I wasn't hungry enough. I wasn't like starving, you know, but we made this stew out of it. And I was so impressed with how delicious it was that I've always kind of wanted to have another piece of camel, but that's neither here nor there. So are you spending, like when you think about but tell me like what your day or your week is like a day in the life. Okay. Well, like I say, since this last injury, it's been a little different, but I get up in the morning and I stretch. I have to kind of heat up the tub and then stretch. And then I work out and then I drink coffee. And before the injury, I'd go sit outside and drink coffee or I'd feed first and then drink coffee and then get started, get my working horse saddled up and start roping colts. And when I was still riding outside horses, gosh, man, I'd be riding horses till 11, 12 every night just because where I live, I can only work for 7 months out of the year, you know, so I got to kind of cram it in. But lately it's been more writing, trying to get this other book done and try to make money without hurting myself. That's a good thing. Yeah. What was your first book? Like, you got to reference this for the audience. So they've, oh, I'm sorry. It was about getting wounded in Iraq and then, you know, recovering and that process. In fact, there's quite a bit in there about the mental side because I did, you know, I went through, I created a lot of my own problems for a while, I guess is what I'd say. Well, that's what I'm really trying to get into is, you know, the audience is a huge percentage of veterans. And like a big part of what I try to do is just focus on how guys can do self-recovery, right? It's like, how can we do better by the community just in general? And like picking your brain because you've written a book and you've obviously been injured. Like I kind of want you to explore that topic for me in a deep way. Okay. Like walk through the process of writing the book and what you had to go through. So I've been I want to preface this a little bit. I have come to believe that the worst thing you can do is like live in it.
You don't need to talk about that shit every day. Because of therapists, we've been convinced that like the World War II guys were stupid and they were just bottling it all up, ruined everything. It's like, no, actually, I think probably bottling it up is probably better or preferable to going to a fucking therapist 3 times a week.
Right.
Because then you're just in that shit all the time. And part of the way I came to this conclusion, I do some public speaking and stuff. And I've been doing that since 2000 and, gosh, I don't know, 7 or 8 or somewhere in there. But I used to do like 15 a year, but I had never stacked as many as I did this last year, like in a row.
Right.
So I did 4 in 6 days. The scheduling just kind of worked out like that. And I never get emotional. I mean, every once in a while there's like a little choke up when I've done virtually the same speech for 10 years, right?
Right.
But this last year on Veterans Day, I was doing a free one for my town. I try to volunteer in my community a lot. And I could not get through it. I was completely kind of a wreck. I was choked up. And I think the reason I'm saying all this is I think it's because I had done 4 speeches in 6 days. So I basically just lived in that place in my head for a fucking week.
Right.
And then you get depressed and you're like, God, I better drink 10 beers and forget about this.
Yeah.
That kind of shit starts happening. And then, you're getting all the, your testosterone gets all fucked up and out of whack. And sorry, am I allowed to curse?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I cuss all the time. It's
okay.
It's meant to be like, it's meant to be as open kimono as possible. Right.
Okay, cool. And so that's what I think the worst thing you can do is live in it.
Yeah.
And I did that for years, man. Freaking, you almost feel like you have like this sense of duty to your buddies that died and shit. Like that you can't, you don't ever want to forget them, but you really don't need to relive that shit every fucking day. Like I promise he doesn't want you to do that. You got to find something to distract yourself with. Take up crochet if you got to,
right.
Just something. I just think we give each other a lot of bad advice, and the VA system is the worst of it. So when I was going through VA was like 2008 or so, somewhere in there, and they required me to go through like mental health evaluation shit, and then it was like, okay, because of your disability percentage, you have to, I think it was 3 times a year I'd have to go sit with this therapist. And I went through like 6 therapists before I finally found one that, I could get along with. And I honestly don't think that's the right approach. I mean, if you're so, now if you're in a bad enough spot that you're going to hurt yourself, like do it, please.
Right.
But if you're like a regular guy going to work every day, like just go hug your fucking kids. You know what I mean? I think you got to move on. And my uncle was like a CCT type guy in Vietnam, and I just talked to him yesterday, and I said, "How do you do it?" I've been trying to read my original book. I've been trying to read for an audiobook, and I'm like, I can't fucking do it. Like I don't want to be there.
Right.
And his name's John, wonderful guy. He said, Braxton, I don't go there. Right. I have my faith and my kids and my business, and I think about that kind of shit. I don't go back to Vietnam, I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I think, Iraq, what I've said to people is like, Iraq for me runs like software in my head all the time, right? So it's just kind of runs. Mm-hmm. It's just kind of back there. I know it's there. Mm-hmm. I don't think there's a possibility of my life of living without it. So I've just said it, I live with it now, right? And it's not in a depressive way. It's more of how do I turn this experience into what I call positive fuel? Mm-hmm. So what I've been trying to figure out is like, this is such a prominent event in our lives. How do we use that? And the analogy that I put is like, you can, by splitting an atom, we can blow up a city or we can power one, right? Mm-hmm. It's all kind of dependent on the way that we want to channel it. Mm-hmm. And like, I've seen so many of my friends, and this has really been the complex and continuing conversation for more the last 5 years because I've had some really close friends commit suicide, which is like very, very hard.
Mm-hmm.
And to your point, it's like I would never get choked up, 7 years ago because I was fully immersed in the culture and making funny videos and things like that. Well, you have a couple of your close friends decide to opt out, and it changes your perception of life. And where I've been trying to figure out is like having these really complex conversations, give people advice to channel that energy in a more positive way. Like some of the things I've had to do, like I can't drink, right? One is like, I've just seen the community dive into a bottle to self-medicate too much.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never seen that go to a positive place. I've never actually seen that work.
Mm-hmm.
Like it works as a Band-Aid, but it doesn't work as a long-term problem solver, like medication.
Yeah. No, it makes it worse.
Yeah.
So I don't drink often. I have a 1 weekend a month thing. That's like my new, but trying to get through this audiobook, dude, I was so much of a freaking wreck. I was like, all right, I have cases of beer for my 1 weekend. I went and opened, and I must have drank probably 10 beers yesterday. And I'm not a drinker anymore. So that's a lot for me. And I think it's exactly what you're saying. So I just like needed to turn my fucking brain off, but I don't think that's the way to do it. Shooting bows is great, right?
Yeah.
Like it's very cathartic. It's one of those things, like we were talking about, it makes you focus. You have to be present to shoot a bow well, I mean, you could be a goober and just fling them all over the target, but if you're going to stack them, you got to be paying attention to what you're doing, I think those kinds of hobbies are better for.
I equate it to like active forms of meditation, right? Where it's like, I don't think there's a better form of therapy than like really hard work, just grinding yourself into moon dust, because it doesn't allow any room for anything else. It's like you dedicate yourself to it, and then you say it's bigger than me, so now I just immerse it and not deviate from it whatsoever.
Sure.
And I think it's just my own perception with it is the more you dedicate yourself to something else, like your family, your business, your community, your faith, the less selfish life can become. And then you don't have to deal with those like thoughts of, your past or quite possibly some of those events. You just like, I don't have time. I got to fucking work.
Yeah.
I don't think there's better form of therapy than hard work.
I really like what you say about dedicating to something other than you too. That's the most important thing, in my opinion. If you don't have, one of my best friends can't have kids, so it's one you can't say, well, do it for your kids, but just something else. I mean, preferably don't make it like a dog that's only going to live 10 years, because then But woman, God, and for me is really really important. Maybe that's not for everybody. I wish it was, but anyway, something bigger than you is right. You have to have that. Have to. It's one of the I don't want to pick on boomers, but one of the things
it's okay if you want to. It's fine. I pick on them all the time.
One of the things that boomers did that I really do not appreciate is they created this culture of self-focus.
Yeah.
They're the first generation that like didn't want their kids to do better than them, like the generations before that, their whole life was, I'm doing this for my kids, the plan is this. And for, again, not to pick on boomers, there's great ones. And I hate the whole generation versus this generation shit, but they really kind of did do that with that hippie, gospel of self shit. Like I hate the, what's that new term? Self-love. Holy shit. I hate that. But self-love, get out of here. Like you gotta love something other than you. Like my wife, first relationship I've ever been in where I completely dedicated every inch of my life to her, right? And she back. And wouldn't you know, it's the best relationship I've ever had. And I think you have to live like that, not just not just to avoid Iraq in your brain or whatever, but just for life in general, you know?
Yeah, I think social media probably accelerates some of the negative aspects of our social communication, you know, because it's so chaotic. My wife and I were having this conversation about this yesterday where, you know, like we're not going to have social media. Well, like our kids aren't going to be participating in social media until like after they're out of our house.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just a decision that we have to make, I think, because it accelerates negative thoughts and this it actually propagates what I would say is like this negative information, whether it's propaganda from TikTok or wherever, whatever platform that it is. Instead of them focusing on becoming better people, they're focused on what somebody else is doing and how they can keep up with the Joneses or how they can do this or how they can do that. I actually think there's a certain percentage of that in veteran circles that is, you know, I from a stereotype perspective, and like I would say the boomer generation, once again, not to pick on them, but this talk therapy around there's something broken in you if you've gone to war, which actually I think a lot of that propaganda was put out by therapists originally just to continue to drive more therapy.
Imagine that.
Yeah. I actually do. Like,
Me too.
Like I've never found a use necessarily for it because obviously, you know, we've been in enough circumstances where we've had to talk to people and like, how can I talk to somebody that's, you know, a PhD that has a very specific political ideology that they're following, and then they're looking at me and they disagree with the war just in principle, maybe.
Yeah.
And it's going to be really hard for them, I think, to provide good therapeutic advice to somebody if they disagree with the entire premise of violence, if they're like pacifists. And a lot of them are, I would say, they're not okay with violence, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
right. It's a left-coded job to begin with. I mean, who wakes up one day and goes, you know what I really want to do is learn how to tell someone else how to live, you know? It's like, that's not a conservative mind,
No.
you know? So,
no.
yeah, I think you can probably discern their political opinions, you know, and their views on the war and all the rest of it pretty safely, you know? Yeah, well, and the purpose of a system is what it does. Some guy always says this, Josh, something smart enough guy. If you have been going to therapy for 20 years and you're still going, then the purpose was to keep you in therapy.
Right.
That was the actual purpose. It's whatever it accomplishes is what its purpose was. I think this applies to, it's pretty universal, actually. I know a girl, nice lady, she works in an industry that I could probably guess. I don't know her political opinions, but I think I could guess them, right? She has been going to therapy. She had some serious trauma as a kid, you know. She's been going to therapy. She's almost 50. Still going to therapy, like twice a week. Now, she's a great person. I'm not trying to be mean or anything, but dude, if you've been going to therapy for 30 years, it ain't working, man. You know?
No.
It ain't working. Go take up fly fishing, for God's sake. Something. You know?
Like, yeah, I try to tell guys a lot where it's like, find something and don't be prohibited in the way that you're pursuing that. You know, I was talking about this a couple months ago where it's outlining, you know, there's like MacArthur, Patton, Eisenhower, Churchill, they were all painters, and it's an active form of therapy, but they wrote and they painted a lot. It wasn't, they were dabbling in it. They were actually doing this on a regular cadence all the time. So I think sometimes there's a stereotype associated with what I would say is veterans and then masculinity, and it dissuades them from being artists to a certain point where I'm like, no, man, I've known a lot of guys, like a lot of people in my family, like they were really, incredible wood carvers and like guys that were spending a lot of time making things with their hands. And it kept them busy and it kept them completely engaged in something, but they didn't have the trappings and stereotypes that I think some people do because of social media. Like, yeah, you can do anything. Like, pick up a interesting hobby that doesn't have any, what I would say is like social stigma associated with it. And who cares?
Right.
Just immerse yourself in it.
Yeah. This, I don't want to be political, but that's a whole problem with conservatives in general. Like, we don't make any art. Or very little art. And it's a major problem. Art, who was it? It was a Dali or somebody. No. Anyway, what the heck was his name? It's going to drive me crazy. But anyway, he said all art is propaganda, kind of famously. That's true. And we don't have any good propaganda because people are wound up on. It's also, isn't it funny that like acoustic guitar is the one thing you're allowed to do, and it's the most fucking obnoxious one.
Yeah. It's like, I believe like that's like the sense of freedom, right? And it's fine if we get political, who cares? Like when you're free and living as a free man, you're determining your life path purely based on where you're finding the most value, not based on what other people are telling you is acceptable. I think, growing up, and you're in Idaho, and now, growing up in a small town in Idaho, we were way more libertarian than we were what I would say is quote unquote traditional conservative or Republican, because there were no suits out there, right? There were people living free. It's like working in the woods. And I mean, I remember this very distinctly, like they're like cousins or extended family members that were, growing pot out in the middle of nowhere. And nobody was like, everybody looked like, okay, those hippies are growing pot out there, but nobody's like, oh, we're going to go roll you guys up and we should be turning you in. No, it's like, hey, you're living free. And I'm like embodying that ethos of like live free or die, like that simple, but yet so powerful of a quote that, by the way, I think is somewhat ironic depending on where you say it and then how it's attached to a license plate.
Yes. This is partly why public lands are so important. Yeah. And I'm pretty far right on a lot of stuff, but I don't care if you call me communist. We need to protect the crown jewel of this country. I don't think freedom in the sort of American sense can be understood without, these public lands. I love people from the South. I notice a fundamental difference in the way that we view the world. They've grown up, everyone on the other side of the Continental Divide has grown up like having to ask permission to go anywhere their whole life. And that does not happen out here. 6 years old, running around with a BB gun and a water bottle, shooting squirrels and stuff is normal. It's not an uncommon kid out here. And that kid grows up to be a different kind of, he sees the world in a different way. Like when I'm in the city, for example, I feel like I'm on train tracks, There's fucking lines and stoplights and shit telling me where I got to go. Don't tell me what to do, I want to go wherever I want to go. And I think that's it's a very, very American perspective. And I think it's an important one, and I don't think it would exist without the American West.
No, I think American West is in some ways it defines what I would say is a very specific cultural divide that we have between what I would say is a Western conservative and others. Because to your point, like public lands and having access to public lands and having the ability to go out and use public lands, like freedom doesn't mean you can abuse things either, right? It comes with extreme accountability it's actually, they run in parallel. I truly believe this. It's like with freedom comes accountability, accountability for your actions, accountability for your future, accountability for, responsibility. Because I think in some ways people think, well, freedom just means that you're a rogue, like doing this lawlessness. And I'm like, well, that doesn't mean you're out in public lands, like throwing beer cans out and like flipping your cigarettes off the trail. That means like, no, I'm protecting and providing some type of structure so other generations, my kids, can go out there and enjoy the same thing. So you can't abuse it.
Yeah, right. I think that's all pretty much true. I think you're kind of describing the difference between like liberty and libertinism. Are you familiar with the term lolbert?
Oh, what's that?
It's like a LOL, but Bert. They're talking about libertarians, right? It's a form of like left-wing libertarianism that you see in a lot of places. It's often accompanied by this sort of libertine view of the world, and that is it's poison, in my opinion. Not boundaries are important. You need to, you set boundaries, so you're obligated to remain within them, I guess, maybe one sense or one way of saying it. Duty, right? That word means something. Like, I drank yesterday. I'm not a big drinker. I shouldn't have done that. And I know that, it's not like I have, some moral, it's not like a moral quandary. It's just like, I know that's not good. Why did I do that? Right? Like this Lolbertism doesn't have that sort of self-disgust mechanism built into it. And it will always, like, degeneracy begets more degeneracy every time. So I kind of hate libertinism, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it's almost like this existential from what I would say is there's a difference between existential anarchy and freedom being chaos, and then freedom being within philosophically grounded balance, which would be like virtue and duty and all these things that we would probably we fundamentally agree to. Because I think there is that like aspect, and obviously seeing it because the anarchy crowd, it's just kind of laughable because they're like, it's almost like a punk rock type, utopian belief that everything can just be as chaotic as you want. Like, that's not really what I'm referring to in any way. I'm like, I think it's like plugging in and creating value in your community, living with dignity, like love and cherishing the values that not only you've grown up with, but maybe embracing and evolving some of those. Kids are a great example. How many kids do you have?
4.
4?
Yeah.
It's like, I think about it now where this is about what am I doing to protect them and what type of freedom they will have so they can go out and define themselves as a success. Like, what does success mean? And one of the things, because you live kind of out in the middle of nowhere, right? I won't say, do you guys homeschool your kids?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, how's that?
It's great.
Yeah.
My wife does most of it right now. She does a good job. I don't have any desire to put my kids in the system. It's great. They're done with school in like 2 hours. And with this, another thing you always hear is like, well, homeschool kids are weird and stupid and, all these different things that people will say. My kids are way ahead. They're way ahead of their peers. And it takes 2 hours a day.
That's crazy. Wait, but explain to me, like, because I have this conversation a lot. I have it with other people, but I don't necessarily know if I've had it on the show, which is the decision to homeschool, and then like this negative stereotype associated with homeschooling kids, but then like unpack that for me. Like, what have you seen in your kids and the amount of responsibility that they have, and like what kind of provides a lot of value there?
My oldest son is 6, and he's now selling eggs because he goes and collects. We get probably 25 or so eggs every day, and I eat a crap load of eggs, but I can't eat 20 a day. So now he's got like this little side hustle going, selling eggs to the neighbors. You know, he's 6 years old. He's already thinking in terms of like generating money in a clean way, right? I think that's one thing, and obviously growing up, he's got horses and some cattle run. We raise our own to eat. We don't sell beef, but he's fundamentally connected to the world in a different way than, say, his cousins who live in the city. He already is rooted in a way that they're not, and I think that's really important. As far as like the weird thing, I put your kids in sports, for heaven's sakes. They're not supposed to socialize at school anyway. All this stuff about like, they got to go to public school so they can get their socialization. And it's like, they're not supposed to be bullshitting with each other at public school. Like they're supposed to be learning, Yeah. So you put them in sports, and I mean, most of my socialization probably came from sports anyway. These kinds of the stigmas are mostly bullshit, and probably a lot of it stems back to the teachers union, I'll bet. And everybody knew the weird homeschool kid growing up, at least our generation. He was weird because his parents were fucking weird. Right. It
didn't have anything to do with him specifically or her. It was like their parents were weird.
Yeah. Yeah. So I just don't think any of it's real. I think it's all, our mutual friend Dale, his kids are great. Look at them. They're great.
Thriving.
Yeah.
Like he was telling me, I think even on the show, he's like, I've seen a complete change since getting the kids out, getting them back into Washington State and spending a lot of time. I was actually talking to my wife about this, where he feels like he's got a deeper connection. His kids are accelerated. They're better. And it makes sense because you think about, a guy like Dale, 20 years in the military, when he retires 06, right? I think. Yeah, something like that. That guy has so much to offer, intellectually, spiritually, like he's a leader. He can plug in and be the leader in the family the way that his family really needs him to be. And I think it provides a great example. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you guys specifically, because I think you guys provide a good example for people to have the courage to go out and do something independent. Like this is me. This is how I'm going to raise my family. This is what I'm doing. And I think it's a positive voice in the community, because I think there's a lot of people that they need the permission to step outside of the social constructs that we're in, to just be a little bit more free and take on a little bit more responsibility. Yeah. And that will pass on to your kids. Yeah. Yesterday, so one of my now favorite horse is this big red dun colt, really nice horse. I was walking around the yard with my 2-year-old, just holding his hand. He's throwing rocks at stuff. He said, "That's my horse." I said, "That's not you. That's my horse." And he said, "No, that's my horse." So we went out to feed. He's like, "I'm going to feed my horse." I said, "Okay." And he's like, "No, you go feed your cow." He's laid this claim on this horse. He can't even ride a horse too, And I think about shit like that. And if my kid was in public school, I wouldn't have those kind of moments with him. No. And I'm blessed enough to, be my own boss. So I guess I can decide when I don't want to work. Right. And I get to have those moments. But I think of say my sister that's kids are in school. I'm like, man, you don't even know how many little things that it's not that you'll miss out on. You'll miss the opportunity to steer that kid in a positive direction. Like someone else is doing the raising of your kids is what's really happening. Yeah. People don't like to hear that, but that is what's happening. And so for me, I was going to perhaps sell this red horse, but now I'm like, well, that's his horse now, Yeah. And that
whenever I give that horse to him, he'll remember that for the rest of his life, you know, that, you know, Dad gave me this horse, and it'll be a fun little story. And you could say, well, you know, your kid could go to public school and you could still have these kinds of experiences. And that's true, but there's so much that happens organically. You'll, throughout the course of a day, you'll never know what moments you missed. And let's see, 2000, something like 5 or 6 years ago, they thought I had a heart attack. I was running like ultra marathons and stuff, and I had chest pain, and my mother-in-law's, you know, been an EMT forever, and she's not like the go to the hospital person.
Right.
So I talked to her on the phone, described it, and she said, you need to go to the emergency room right now. So I go in, you know, what am I at this time? I'm like 32 or whatever I was. And they draw my blood and they said, you had a heart attack. And I was like, holy shit, man. My oldest son was like 1, you know. I'm thinking, anyway, it really changed the way I viewed the world. It turned out I didn't have a heart attack. I got hit in the plates in the war, and it left a scar on my heart. So the EKG shows up as a heart attack, and they had screwed up, and it wasn't the protein they thought. Anyway, long story short, I didn't have a fucking heart attack. But I'm 30, you know, roughly 30. I got a 1-year-old son, and I think it's like, holy shit, man, after all of this, I'm going to die of a heart attack at 30 years old, you know? And that changed the way that I look at life forever. I mean, I will never, I had been like basically atheist weirdo for years. Like I just didn't believe in anything, you know? And in that moment, that night when I got home, I was laying there with my son holding my hand, and I got down on my knees and prayed and just said thanks, you know. I could have fucking died in Iraq, you know. So just to have even one day with him was more than I probably deserved, you know. And so I basically have this cultivation of gratitude mindset that I try to carry with me all the time, you know. Like, obviously, I make plenty of mistakes. I'm definitely not without my flaws. You know, I'm fucking retarded.
But you're in good company.
But so homeschool is part of that. I'm like, you know what? I don't want to miss 1 second with that kid. You know, all of my boys and my daughter as well. I never miss a softball. I did yesterday, but pretty rare. I would never want to be on my deathbed thinking, shit, man, I wish I would have spent more time with my kids, you know. And this is not to like pick on people who are in a situation where they can't, you know, like I understand some guys are 9 to 5, like, gets back from the war and he was a mechanic or whatever. And so he went to work as a mechanic and his wife has to work to help.
Yeah.
Dude, I get it. I'm not. But if you're in a position to do it, you should, in my opinion.
No, I agree. My wife and I have been talking about it. We've got a good school. Kids go to a good school because one of the, I would say, the most prominent decision factor is like, look, I don't want my kids to be indoctrinated with like woke propaganda, right? Like that's number one.
Yeah.
In our they have to be focused on education and the principles of math and English and things like that. Socialization is like down the line. Like you said, this is why sports are important and, you know, getting your kids socially involved in different activities throughout the community. But I think that number one, like this is it's an IO campaign, right? It's an information operation that are typically driven from my perspective from enemies outside and within the state, depending on how you want to look at it. And this whole conversation around, you know, and we have it obviously, and my wife and I just got back from Washington State and Seattle, and you know, it's some type of indoctrination and IO campaign that is not focused on accelerating education. It's focused on like gender or whatever it is, and it's like, dude, we don't even want to have these like. It's such a ridiculous, from my perspective, so ridiculous. It shouldn't even be brought up within the school system. Let alone the fact that it's like, my kids are young. They shouldn't be having those conversations to begin with. But it's for us, as we start to look at next, like we're looking at next year where we can be in a position to take a more proactive approach in the way that we're integrating and our kids into like travel, for instance. I'm from, Idaho, and I can spend more time up there. We can pull them out of school, be out of school for a week or two, and we'll offset. But we've got to look for those opportunities to spend more time with our kids in a way that's like directly benefiting them. And I agree with you. I think this isn't to beat up on people from 9 to 5. I am going to beat up on people a little bit when it comes to this. It's like on an average, and I read this statistic a few years ago, kids are spending about 3.5 hours a day on TV. Wow. Like your average American kid between the ages of, I think it's like 6 and 16 are spending 3.5 to 4 hours a day on TV. And now TikTok has replaced that to the tune of about 2.5 hours, depending. It's from like 9 to 16 or something like that. So you're allowing the most precious thing that we have to be socially indoctrinated, like raised from an outside source, depending on who you're, sending your kids to educate, and then plugging them into an electronic device for several hours a day. I understand that there's a lot of parents out there that don't have the choice, but what I'm saying is maybe make this a different priority in your life and make those life changes so you can take away those hours that you're basically flushing down the toilet with your kids.
Yeah.
And they're, a lot of people like, Netflix is this and Amazon and Disney and all that. I'm like, yeah, but you're just giving them an iPad and sending them telling them to go away. You're expecting to have this relationship with these kids. Like I have the same thought. I call it the last minute of life philosophy. It's like, if I'm on my deathbed and I have 1 minute left and I'm kind of like looking at my watch, the only thing I'm going to want is an extra minute with my kids and my wife.
Yep.
I'm not going to look for, I wish I was in another board meeting. Right? Or like, I'm not going to say, man, I wish I would have got a golden toilet somewhere in my fucking house. None of this stuff, all this stuff's going to be meaningless. Right. It's going to be like, how do I get more time with those kids? And the most precious thing I have is the hug that I get from the 10-year-old and my 6-year-old and my wife. Yep. Like that connection. It's the greatest thing in my life, hands down.
There's nothing close. Yeah. The only regrets I have with my kids are regrets about like mistakes I made, like as far as spending time with my kids, I'd be like, I said something I shouldn't have, or I got mad about something that was stupid, or I wish I wouldn't have took my kid fishing that day. I could have, like that fucking thought never, I could have sold 500 more books if I don't give a fuck. Like, I think it's important to evaluate what you want out of life. Like there was this lady, she makes about 50 grand a year. Going to work. She has a husband who does okay. Her childcare bill was like, I want to say $3,400 a month. I'm like, hey, have you ever done the math on this? So you're going to work 300 days a year or whatever it is for roughly $8,000 or so. Like, wouldn't you rather just not have the $8,000 and have the time with your kids? I don't know. I just think that sometimes people don't, they don't actually like sit back and really focus, or not focus, but really hone in on what it is they want. Like I used to make more money by a lot. Even riding colts, I used to make more money than I do now, but I'm not working in 16 hours a day. Right. I eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner with my sons. I mean, fuck, I'll take the 20, 30 grand a year pay cut. I don't give a fuck. yeah, I really believe that a lot of people haven't actually sat back and examined everything around them. Like we want to, we're going to buy some property and down here. I wanted to take on a bigger investment up there, and it would have been a better investment long term. But the financial commitment to that would take me away from my kids.
Right.
It's not that I'm scared of the debt or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
It's I don't want to be in a position where I know I can't go fly fishing with my son if he wants to.
Right.
I'm just not willing to do that. So, I'll be less successful in life because of it, but I don't care.
I agree. That was the deciding factor for me to go from CEO to chair was I could spend more time with my kids. I could hunt with them. I could fish with them. I could spend way more time directly engaged in their lives. I made that change in my life. I didn't have to, but it was like the point. It was like, hey, I'm 47. I'm not getting any younger. I'm not going to get any of this time back. So it was like, stop paying myself, move to chair, completely changed the way that I did business because like it's more important for me to spend time with my kids than anything else. And I do, like I'm harsh on guys. Like I'll tell them straight up. It's like if you're working 50, 60 hours a week and you're not seeing your kids and then you go to the golf course in the weekend and you think that's okay, I would probably suggest reevaluating the way that you connect in with your family because what you're going to do is you're going to turn around in 15 or 20 years. You're going to say, I don't know my kids. Why do they fucking hate me? Like, why is this? Why is this? Why is this? And then you're going to go, woe is me. Woe is me. I did everything I could. And you're just wrong. You didn't do everything you could because you decided to go hit fucking 18 instead of spending time with your kids. And I see it. I see it with other people and I'm not okay with it. Because I think it's a lack of correct prioritization. I do. I think, as a father, you have not only responsibilities, but you also have responsibilities to your family. You have responsibilities to yourself, but you have responsibility to your community to raise good people. And if you're expecting the school district and the college to do that, you're just wrong.
Right. Anytime I talk about this kind of stuff, I always think about my cousin. I remember I had to be 25 or something. He's the one who got me into bow hunting. I was like 14. I grew up rifle hunting and all that stuff, but got me into bow hunting. He's actually was on the USA team this year. He's a great he's a great archer, really good actually. He sends me a picture of this 2-point he shot. I was probably like 25 or so. And I was like, what in the hell? Why'd you shoot that? I'm kind of up on my high horse. And he said, well, I had my son with me. And I was like, so his first deer he sees dead is a 2-point? You feel good about this? I'm like, and he's like, well, realistically, was I going to be able to kill a 30-inch buck with my bow and my 4-year-old? Like, was that really going to happen, And I had been judging him, but now I think back, I've shot 1 2-point ever, and it was with my stick bow. But if this year, with my 3 boys, if there's a freaking spike ass, I'm shooting it. I don't care. I've shot plenty of bucks, but that being able to have your kids there with you thing. And I was teasing them about it back then.
Right.
And I see it through completely different eyes now, It's actually like that's the right thing to do, I don't know. I'm being rambly about it, but I think we're kind of saying the same thing. It's like prioritizing your time and the moments themselves and making those decisions for them. I love bow hunting. I love elk hunting. I love mule deer hunting, but for whatever reason, the elk has just always been a thing for me.
Yeah.
I used to go on like 2-week pack-in trips, and now I can't go for freaking overnight without missing my kids. Like, it's changed the way I hunt. Now I'm hiking my ass off just so I can come home and see my kids, So it's like once you start thinking in that way, you'll change even the stuff that you thought you loved. You were talking about golfing, like, well, it'd be one thing if you were taking your kid with you, but it's a whole other thing when you're going hiding from them so you can hang out with your buddies or whatever,
So you can down a few more beers on the weekends or whatever. Yeah. I say, I hear that. I mean, I think the same thing. Like, skydiving for me is like, I still love it, but I can't enjoy it as much as I used to because it's not the fact that I'm like worried about burning in. It's like, okay, am I going to break an ankle or, tear something up that's going to prevent me from playing soccer in the backyard with my kids, which is actually way more enjoyable to me than skydiving, right? It's like taking my kids on a bike ride or, hiking with them or going hunting with them. It's way more important to me than like jumping out of a plane and getting it's so selfish because I enjoy it. And it's one of those things that if I was single, I didn't have any kids and I didn't have anything that was like more important, more interesting, it would be great. I would do it all the time. But now I'm like, oh man, I, tear an ankle up doing this or blow a hip or something. Well, how is that going to change the way that I'm interacting actively with my kids? And I got 2 little girls, like one's 6 and one's 10, and they're super active. And I think you got to be an active father, meaning like you got to be fit.
Sure.
You got to be not only fit as a protector and the provider, but it's also, you got to be fit to plug in and treat, and have that time to be like really physically involved in their lives where you're like going to, play with them on the playground. And like, I do these like feats of courage with the kids all the time where I'm like, all right, what are you going to do? How are you going to impress me here? You going to climb up that and stand on that thing? Or how many pull-ups can you do? There's always like feats of strength and courage going on. And if you're not able to do that, I think that's part of the whole thing of like taking on the accountability of being a father and then immersing yourself in the layers of responsibilities and then also finding fulfillment out of that can become the thing for vets.
Sure.
It's like, if you don't have a family, I'm not saying you need to run out and marry the first. We've all seen how that goes.
My dumbass did it.
Well, we've seen how some of those things turn out.
No, this one didn't. No, I'm with you on all this, man. Like we were talking earlier about this latest injury. Not that I'm trying to be whiny about it, but I love bucking horses. I've loved riding them my whole freaking life. I love it. I don't know why. I really enjoy it. My wife one time, this horse trying to buck me off, and she said, "You are fucking smiling." I was like, yeah, I love it. I'm like, this is my thing. But man, I don't want to be paralyzed and not be able to be a dad. You're talking about the fit dad thing. It's so important to me. I'm like, well, my first love was bucking horses, probably, and maybe steers, but you know what I mean. That kind of, I love rough stock. I enjoyed it. But now, like, freak, man, I'm about 40 and I'm pretty bust up as it is. And if I do anything more, if I can't, how many times I broke my fucking back 4 times. Is the 5th one going to be the one that paralyzes me? You know what I mean? And then I can't be that fit dad. Right. And I know guys that are paralyzed that do a great job, and it's nothing like that. I just mean, if I bet you if you asked him if there was any way he could have prevented getting paralyzed, he'd probably say, yeah. You know what I mean? And my stupid ass could very easily prevent getting paralyzed by just not riding that horse. Yeah. You know what I mean? So yeah, you got to make those kinds of decisions that like change. Like I said earlier, once you become oriented at your children or toward your children, once you orient your life towards your children, you'll see the world in such a fundamentally different way that all of these things will change. Yeah. I hope one day when I die, God will let me ride them things in heaven. But I probably ought to stop now.
Infinite titanium bones and like and all the rough stock of the world to ride. Like, okay, that's a different type of heaven than I've heard from other people.
Hopefully, softer ground than the place I live right now.
Are you teaching the kids archery like early? Yeah.
My one son, they both like shooting, but my middle boy loves shooting. Really? We took and painted his bow to match mine and shit now. So it's like, we shoot and we really enjoy it. My daughter too. She's getting better. Yeah. She's like she could barely draw enough to, kill something, but.
Yeah. my girls have kind of grown up with it. Like they've just shooting all the time. Like I've got these little bolt action 22s that are suppressed, and we'll take them out and I've grab a pair of NVGs and take them out at night, and we can shoot coyotes or whatever. And they're like, my daughters and my oldest is 10, and like the whole thing was like get her to shoot out to a grand by the time she was 10. Well, she shot out to a grand when she was like 8. So now I'm like 2 years ahead, but she still loves like shooting bows. My wife shoots a bow. Like we all kind of shoot bows and rifles depending on the time. But you get into a range, getting access to all that. Like sometimes, I live in the city for now. Oh. Can be a pain in the ass, man.
Well, I guess why the hell would you want to say it? But I was gonna say, I think you live near to my in-laws, don't you?
Yeah.
At least it's not too,
it's not too bad. Like and we can get out. Like, when we lived in Texas, it was a lot easier. Here, you can get out and like you can shoot all over. But I've got an archery set up there at the shop. I should have showed it to you before we left. I got a whole like archery shop there in the gym.
Oh no shit.
Yeah, so I've got a whole setup for building bows, like doing whatever the fuck we want to do to them. And I'll get the kids together from the neighborhood and we'll do archery practice. We had them here actually not too long ago. I had a couple kids over here when my dog decided to jump off. By the way, where is he? Is he cruising around here? All right, he's downstairs. I was going to say, did I forget him in the truck? Which wouldn't surprise me. Forget him in the truck. So I got to ask you, because you're somewhat active on Twitter and the evolution of that from like, how did you just like turn it on and start like engaging, or was it like something that happened because of the book, or was it before the book?
No, I got on Twitter when I first turned my Twitter on, we were night cabbing and I was just bored and trying to stay awake. Yeah. And someone had mentioned, I knew Twitter existed, but I'd never used it. And I just got on there and started talking shit at AOC just for
fun.
Awake, so that's how it started. But then I didn't touch it again until either March or May of the next year once we were done night cabbing there. And I got on because I was booked to speak at an event in Las Vegas. And so for years, I'd been really careful with my political opinions because, corporate. Yeah. And at that time, speeches made up something like 25% of our annual, Right. Freaking COVID happened. So I'm supposed to be there on Sunday, I think, and they call me on Friday. And they're like, we have to cancel. And I was like, oh, shit. Well, then everybody, of course, started canceling. So for the whole year, all those speeches still just barely kind of coming back online, but all those speeches got canceled, and I was like, well, fuck it. I guess I'll just go say what I think then. I don't have to worry. Right. I don't have to like muzzle myself anymore. So I just kind of started talking shit. And I still use Twitter the same way as I did. In fact, I have a friend that calls me periodically and is like, you have got to stop saying shit like this. He's like, one day you were going to, bite something off that you can't survive from. But, anyway, I still just have fun with it. It's not a thing I take seriously. It's definitely helped, and I'm grateful for the people that have supported, and bought books and these kinds of things. I'm very grateful for them, but it's not a thing I think a lot of people take way more seriously than I do. They've got like this whole, they've got this persona that they've crafted, and then their life becomes trying to pretend to be this thing, and it's Twitter is a hell of a place. It's one giant fucking mental institution is what it is. Yeah. So if you're not having fun there, I think avoid it. Like it's a waste of.
It's a quagmire, right? So you get into it and it's like, I don't tune into Twitter. Like as much as like people think maybe I'm engaged in social media, I'm really not. Right. Like every now and again, like, I'll post in ghost. Like I just post in ghost, like get on, get off, get on, get off. And it's mainly because it's like it starts eating up your time, right? Mm-hmm. And I do find like most of this stuff to be like super interesting from just a pure entertainment value perspective. So like, X and like the news feed and the way things kind of develop through the news feed, and then it goes from like X into other platforms, or it like generates and it kind of moves through the cycles of different platforms. And it's interesting because as powerful as people think that it is, and it is, it also has like a finite memory span at times where you're like, it goes up and it goes down, it goes up and it goes down, it goes up and it goes down. And you see the cycle of like the outrage mafia is always like outraged over something somewhere. There's always somebody outraged over something going on. Who the fuck knows, right? It's like that week. But it's interesting because the guys that treat it like you do, I think it's like more beneficial for them because it's like, it's entertainment.
Yeah.
You're not like, this isn't part of your personality. Like this isn't defining you as a person.
Yeah. One of the things I learned by watching people on Twitter is you better hope you never get accused of something, because 70% of people are going to believe whatever is said. And no matter what counterfactuals you bring later on, they will never and they will just run with lies forever.
Yeah.
So that kind of helped me also to be like, fuck this. Like one day someone's going to say I did something, everyone's going to believe it, So who cares? Like, I'm just going to fuck around and basically treat it like a locker room, just talking shit and having a good time. And I do think that even then you can get too absorbed in it really easy, especially for me in the winter. It's so easy to procrastinate, I'm like, can't really ride colts or nothing. So I really ought to be working on this fucking book that I promised people I would have done last year and still haven't,
What's the next book on?
Well, the plan had been to write kind of about the ethnogenesis of America. Like my personal belief is that the identity of American actually formed on the plains, the settlers and the pioneers that, from the Ohio River Valley to California.
Right.
Like, that's really where we became an American. Before that, we were just sort of a little bit of we were definitely different, but we were kind of the weird step cousin of Britain still, we were still kind of British. But we became us on the plains. And I was trying to write about that, but the problem is now it's like going to be 800 effing pages because I didn't want to be superficial about it. I wanted to really. So now I'm going to have to be a little superficial about it because no one's buying an 800-page book written by me. So, but that was what that book was about. And now I've been, so I'm actually, some of the stuff that's just not going to make it into that book, I'm going to put out in podcast form. Just some of it's interesting shit. And then someone asked me to write about the Mustang problem because I have very particular feelings on this, growing up on the edge of the basin and, being around horses my whole life. So I'm writing about that as well. I'm kind of scattered all over, but I would really like to get the book on America done. I'd really like to get that done this year. So
okay, that's a good place to pause because I got to take a piss and then we'll come back and talk about that. All right. So Mustang problem. What is the problem?
Well, the we have too many is the short answer. Horses are great. I love horses. A lot of lies are told about how this whole thing shook out. It is true that the horse evolved here in America. That's true. But the horse that was here before they were extirpated, no one actually really knows where they went. Like no one actually. There's a bunch of different theories, but nobody knows why they were not extant here in North America anymore, despite having evolved here. But that animal was nothing like the animal that we have now. So the people that call these things wild horses, they're already betraying their political views by just using that term because they're feral is what they are. the way that they got here, everybody knows, right? The Spaniards brought them over, and then the Puebloan revolt, and so on and so forth. But the thing is horses are really hard on riparian areas, for one. And the place where they're at right now is a desert, basically. The entire range that they're on in America essentially is a desert, which means there's not a lot of water. So when you get a bunch of horses together, they'll drink creeks dry, they'll stomp creeks, paw at them and shit. And a lot of these little springs are very fragile. And once you break it, that thing may never bubble back up, at least not without human intervention, right? Like they could drill and these kind of, so they're tough on the terrain. And the sort of the leftist perspective of this is that, well, they're these beautiful, majestic, noble animals, and they're American, and so they belong here. Well, they're out competing mule deer for resources right now. Mule deer is probably the United States mule deer population is probably the most fragile population we have right now. Their numbers are declining.
Yep.
And no one really knows why. There's a whole bunch of different theories. Some people are blaming CWD. Some people are, there's for whatever reason, the oil gets blamed a lot, like drilling, and no one really knows, right? But they're dying off, and the horses are making that problem worse. America spends something like $1 billion a year on these horses. One of the things we're doing is giving them contraception via mineral licks and shots and different. We're giving birth control to these horses, right? If you would have told somebody that 50 years ago, they would have had a heart attack. Like you're giving contraception to a horse because you can't figure out how to manage, the population. The BLM guys that manage the so-called wild horse program, any one of them you speak to privately will tell you we have to solve this problem, or it's not gonna fix itself. And the way that we're doing it right now isn't working, and they know it's not working. They'll always show you pictures of these animals looking beautiful, and I love horses. I agree with all those things. They are right. They are beautiful and noble and majestic and all the rest of it. But they'll show you those pictures, but they'll never show you the pictures of the ones that are starved to death.
Right.
Because there's not enough feed left on the range. They don't want you to see that kind of shit. And the fact is, these animals are feral. They are a non-native species. They are not native to here. They're managed unlike any other wildlife in this country. They have their own 2 different acts. The first, what was that called? Anyway, it was in the 50s, the first act, Mustang Annie Act, maybe it was called, and then the Wild Horse and Burro Act of 71. So they've got like their own laws passed around these things. In my grandpa's time, in the basin and Nevada and stuff like that, what people would do is that if they had a stud horse that they didn't think was really going to cut it on their ranch, they'd turn it out with these wild horses to try to improve the genetics of the wild horses. So then they'd go round these wild horses up, and they'd keep the good ones and use them as ranch horses.
Right. Well,
that was made illegal. You can't do that anymore, and it's been that way since the 50s. But it is true. The story that's often told is that, well, these Mustangers, is what they call them, were going out and round these things up and killing them and selling them for dog food. Well, that was happening, but they were also being utilized in the way that they should be. Like if we're going to have this animal extant on our landscape, then why can't the people who live closest to it use them? And it boils down to rounding up horses looks mean and scary. Another problem that's emerged from this is the federal government is now leasing pastures in the Midwest. So now you have to put these wild horses on there, gather them up, move them to these pastures. So now what you have is the federal government bidding against farmers for lease ground. Well, I don't think you have to. I don't even know if that's constitutional, whatever, but that is happening.
Yeah.
So now you have the federal government putting its thumb on the scale of the ag industry in a way, and not in any like huge thing, but if my son was trying to lease ground and I found out the feds leased it for $20 more than anybody can afford, I'd be pretty freaking pissed off about it.
Right.
That kind of shit's happening. You can't really like, you can't say, well, you know what we ought to do is just have like a bow season for, you know what I mean? People would have a freaking heart attack.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
They'd freak out.
But we've got to do something and at least be honest and call them what they are. They're feral, non-native animals.
Right.
This whole thing about them being wild horses, it's like you're starting from a lie.
Right.
You know? And like I say, I love horses. It's almost, I feel similarly to wolves in some way. Like I like seeing wolves. I enjoy them on the landscape. I love seeing grizzly bears. We don't need a population of 2,000 grizzly bears in the GYE, which is probably what we have now, right? You've got to start managing these things in ways that make sense. If you're going to decide to leave these Mustangs on the landscape, then at least give the government the tool, or the people that work for the bureaucracies, the tools to manage the population. You know, I'm a horse trainer. Why can't I go get 20 of these Mustangs, start them, and sell them?
Right.
Why not? They won't. They have this tip program, trainer initiation program, but the way that works, my understanding anyway, I was going to enroll in it at one point, but my understanding is they give you $1,000 to take this horse. You've got to keep it for a full year before you can sell it, and there's all kinds of different stipulations applied. And this is I could be getting this wrong, so please fact check me in the comments. I know you're going to anyway. You have to have 6 foot tall fences, and you have to have cover for them or whatever. These things live out in the desert,
Right.
But if you bring it to your house, then you've got to have a barn for it. It's like, what the hell, you know?
Right.
And you can't sell it for so long, and all of this. Like that's a ridiculous system. At least give trainers the ability to go pick them up and train them and sell them. And they do some of this with like,
And you can do that, and
no, go ahead.
correct me, but so you can actually go and do that. You can break a wild horse, and it turns out okay. Like I'm just envisioning, like, wouldn't it be so difficult to take something that's been wild and then conform it back to, working animal or recreational animal? It works.
Oh yeah. Well, it depends on the age.
Right.
If you go get like a 9-year-old stud, that's not happening.
Yeah.
Yeah. A 2-year-old horse, for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. A lot of the colts I ride, these quarter horse colts, they grow up on a huge ranch up there. I mean, they might as well be wild, but this one ranch has got a fence that borders BLM for 70 miles. I mean, it's a huge place. Yeah, you can take broomtails and train them for sure. And that's what
Are they any good?
Are they any good?
Yeah.
Very hit and miss in my opinion. And again, I don't hate them, but I've seen some good ones. And I've seen some real shit bag. I like my quarter horses, but we can't do anything because of these 2 very stupid acts that were passed because some hippie from Reno, worst city in the country, decided to.
No offense, Remy. I love you, buddy.
I like that guy too, but she decided to make this her pet cause, and so it's been surrounded with emotion from day one. They had to pass the second act to give them some tools. Like one thing the first act did is it prohibited the government itself from using helicopters to round these things up. And some studies were done. They took this is how far our government went for these animals. They took the woman, Wild Horse Annie, up in a helicopter and showed her that this was actually a safer way to gather them up, which is true. For sure that would be true.
You net them? Like shoot them with a net? Or
no, they'll run them into a corral.
Oh, okay.
Big catch pen.
So it's not like wild sheep or something where they like actual like got it.
No, God, can you imagine freaking that Mustang? Holy shit. Oh, that thing would have come apart. I can just freaking imagine. Yeah, they'll run them in a catch pen and then they put them through, some chutes and give them shots and check on their feet and their legs and, make sure, give them vet care essentially. Float their teeth if they need to, and and then kind of just turn them out into these pens. And you can go adopt a Mustang horse. You can do it. I think it's $120 or something.
Right.
But again, it comes with all these freaking stipulations that if this thing turns out to be a complete dipshit, you can't sell it for X amount of time.
Right.
And, it's just dumb. There's no reason. If we can't eat them, which to be honest, mostly I'd be fine with. But if we can't eat them, then at the very least, make it so these horse trainer kids can go get 20 of them. And, at least let the that would make my the market I work in worse because it would drive costs down. It's almost like immigrant labor sort of thing. You'd get these cheaper animals. It would definitely drive costs down, and I would make less money. But at least we would be doing something about a problem that everyone knows exists. Has existed since the 50s. Everybody knows. None of this is a shock to anybody involved. But there's no political will to do anything about it. And I understand why, because can you imagine running on the campaign of I'm going to make it legal to eat spirit? You know what I mean?
It'd never work.
No, it would be a death sentence.
Yeah. It'd be funny. It'd be a funny campaign.
I might do it. Yeah, I don't know what we're going to do, but something needs to change. Mule deer are native, and that's one of the species that are going to potentially run into the ground. So we got to do something. Have to.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I was talking to a couple guys here locally, and we were talking about the mule deer population and the elk population both, because of last year, we had an 86-year record. Killed off what they estimate about 70% of the mule deer population in the Uinta Mountains right here. And I mean, that's a huge percentage. And some guys are saying it's up to like 85.
Holy shit.
So somewhere in that bracket. And when you start thinking about, well, what are the second and third order effects of the decrease in population from that much? And we were talking about how, the elk population is still thriving because they can go out and they can still get the food resources, and they didn't have, they had like a 10 to 15% decrease based on snow population or the snow. So why did they weather the snow and the mule deer didn't? And, are they in competition for a lot of the fuel resources? And is there a tipping point between populations now, between the elk population, mule deer population, where it's essentially just being overrun? Because that's part of the conversation, is like getting more tags for some of these areas, because we can't get cow tags, and they have, in the northeast section of Utah, they were talking they probably need to issue about 6 to 10x more tags than they do right now, just to try to check and balance the population itself.
Yeah, they definitely compete some. They do have different diets, but they definitely compete some. I did not know that the Uintas got hit that hard with that population. That might be irrecoverable, man.
Might be, yeah. Were you guys in Idaho? Was it just the populations mainly being affected up there by what are they being? Is it the wolves that are decreasing the population more than anything, or is it something else?
Wolves kill a shitload of elk. Yeah. Anyone that tells you they don't is lying.
No, they're lying. Yeah.
I don't know if they're the real reason our populations are dropping. Nobody likes when I say this, but I actually think it's you can draw a line from the rise in popularity of bow hunting and the decreased number of bow hunters wound a lot of shit.
Yeah, they do.
And bow hunters and I'm a bow hunter, you know what I mean? I've wounded animals. the other thing that has happened, and I'd say, and this is not to say anything bad about Cam Hanes, but he did kind of popularize this, lift, run, shoot stuff, and it's great. I'm not bad mouthing Cam. But one of the sort of, you're talking about secondary effects of that, one of the secondary effects of that has been a lot of guys who are actually not very good hunters at all are in real damn good shape. And so they're getting a lot of miles in and shooting animals that they wouldn't have 10 years ago because they're not great hunters, but they're tougher than they were when I was a kid. So I think that's no one, like I say, no one likes to hear that. But in my valley, when I was guiding there, it was not uncommon for me to call in 5 bulls a day. Mm-hmm. Totally normal. It's a huge valley, right? But 5 bulls a day. Now, if I call 5 bulls in a season, I've done good. And I'm not Jason Phelps, but they didn't pay me to do it for nothing. I can call elk. And I personally think that is definitely elk, or excuse me, wolves. But I personally think a lot of it has to do with, bow hunters getting in better physical strength.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my cousin, he and I were talking about this just in Clearwater County. He had grown up. He goes, Dirk Durham is his name. He goes by the Bugler on IG if you guys want to follow him. But he works for Phelps, has for 10 years. He's won the Rocky Mountain bugling competition numerous times. He's pretty accomplished elk hunter.
Yeah.
He grew up in Orfino, which is, on the Clearwater River. And he could go out and put in maybe 30 miles of like between vehicle and foot before he had a bull. And last year he said he put in 300.
Whoa. Yeah.
So he's putting in 10x the mileage to get response in the same area that he grew up hunting for the last 40 years. I mean, he killed his first bull when he was 12 years old with a bow. So that's telling you, and he's killed a bull every year. Mm-hmm. He's my age. He's actually 2 years older than I am. So he's 49. And that tells me a lot as to he's putting in 10x the mileage to get out and have something. But he's telling me, he's like, the population just in general, like the elk population has been chopped by, 90% in some cases, in some regions, especially where the reintroduction of the wolf.
Oh yeah.
And I remember I was in college at U of I, and my roommate was on that project, and they were reintroducing it back into the Lolo Pass. 97 is when I was talking to him, and we were having that conversation. He's like, man, I don't know how this is going to go. And like, now I think it's fairly obvious as to how it went.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. One of my neighbors, he lost 40 head of cattle in 1 year to wolves in our valley. 40 head.
40.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a shitload of money, They are killing machines. Like that's what they do. And they're not, at this point, you will never extirpate those things without the poison. I took poison the first time.
Yeah.
To tie back to horses, one of the things they would do is inject strychnine into horses and kill them, so then the dog would come eat the horse, and die on poisoned meat. It's one of the things they used Mustangs for back then. Not that I think that's a horrible thing to do, but they would inject them while they were alive, so it would pump through the whole system. Yeah. And that's how they finally got wolves killed off, was with these various poison methods. The reason I'm saying this is the people that think you shouldn't hunt wolves are so disconnected from the reality of wolves that they're not worth listening to. And for some reason, a lot of our politicians still listen to them. You could make it your life's goal. I could go out with my nods every night and call wolves, and if I did that every single day for the next, however many years I'm blessed enough to be alive, I'd probably kill 5.
Right.
You know what I mean? You're never going to, hunting methods are never going to work. It'll never work. And I'm not saying we need to, extirpate them again, but I'm fine that they're extant on the landscape, but we have got to start killing wolves because elk populations, ranchers, and what people will say when you bring up the stuff like the 40 head of cattle thing, they'll say, well, the government pays you back for that. No, they don't. There's there's like a pool of money, and that gets, my understanding anyway, I've never had anything killed by a wolf. My understanding is that pool of money gets divvied out to every, wolf kill that's been confirmed. So maybe you might get $1,000, maybe you might get 40, depending on the year. So no, they don't pay you back, and you're just out that. And other people will say shit like, well, those wolves were here before, the cattle were. It's like, one, I don't care.
Right.
Like fundamentally, I care about the American first, the American person first. I care about wildlife and all of this, but I care about my countrymen more than I do wildlife. I love wildlife. It's hard to articulate this, but my people will always matter to me more than anything but God. Right. So first of all, I don't care. And second of all, that's not even true. I know like Steve, who I am an admirer of, his books are great. I'm not, it's just a different perspective. I've heard him say that this is not true, but those wolves did come from the McKenzie Valley. Mm-hmm. And I understand that there's only one Canis lupus and all this shit. They did come from the Canis Valley. And the traditional Idaho timber wolf was about half the size of the wolves they have now. Or not, just, say 60% of the size or so. The traditional timber wolf was about the size of the European wolf, which is like, 50 to 70 pounds on the high end. They've killed wolves in the McKenzie Valley that were over 120 pounds. Mm-hmm. That's a way bigger animal. For some reason, people don't care about this, but we still had native caribou in Idaho maybe 10 years ago. And the guy who managed that program, there was only like 18 left. Mm-hmm. The guy who managed that program begged Fish and Game, like, we've got to kill these things. The caribou are not going to, they're not going to make it. Well, they didn't. They're all dead, So for some reason, the left loves, and I know I've heard the charismatic megafauna theory, and I think there's a lot of truth to that. But for some reason, the left doesn't give a shit about caribou. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It's just they've picked this animal. It's like they think it's Fido, and it ain't. Well,
I think part of it is it comes from a anti-gun narrative, because if you have a predator that's balancing out the prey, there won't be a need for a clear articulation of a hunting rifle. Mm-hmm. So, and they've come out and said that in California in multiple cases. So what we'll call it the California Coalition for Cougars or whatever it is, they've come out and literally said that.
No kidding.
Which is they lobby for the protection of cougars, non-hunting, because part of their goal is to eliminate the need for firearms specific related to hunting. Because if you can't hunt because there isn't an elk or a deer, or there's no need. So part of it comes from that side of the fence.
And dude, you were called a conspiracy theorist 5 years ago if you said that.
100%. They've said it. It's actually on their.
I don't.
Yeah, it's like it. So we at least all have to be cognitively open to the fact that this is a really complex conversation, and part of it is really just about, hey, if you guys don't have access to guns, that's a win for them in some circumstances. Which
that side of politics is so control oriented. They're nightmarishly so. Like if they could turn every piece of ground in America into like some bubble wrapped fucking national park, that's what they'd do. Mm-hmm. Or are you familiar with the 30 by 30 program?
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, they're telling you right now what they're trying to do. I asked a friend who's an attorney, I said, is there anything prohibiting the federal government from just at the stroke of a pen ending grazing leases across all forest and BLM? And he said, I don't think so. So when they say they're going to do that, I promise you they're going to, that's the plan. And why do you think they want to do that? you know? So the wolf reintroduction in Colorado, the point of the wolf reintroduction in Colorado is to stick a thumb in the eye of people they don't like.
Right.
That's why they did it.
That's why.
They hate rural people. They hate ranching. They don't give a shit about beef or beef production. They hate you. You know what I mean? And I think a lot more people are starting to wake up to this, that the anti-hunting thing, it isn't about protecting or giving a shit about animals. They don't care.
Mm-hmm.
The guy who spends his life in pursuit of elk or mule deer knows more and loves them deeper, more deeply than that anti-hunter ever will. It's
100%.
It's not about that. It's they don't like him.
Mm-mm. They don't like the individual. They don't like the way that it's generational. So it's part of a family and a process. Like that's 100% part of this whole thing. It's not about the protection of the animal. It's about control over somebody else.
Right. 100%. If it was about protection of the animal, they would quit building their fucking apartments on Winter Range.
Yeah.
You know, like Park City. You just, okay. The only winter range in that area of the, the Wasatch is basically now taken up with, rich people's, and I don't have anything against money or anything like that, but it's like, you clearly don't give a shit about the elk. If you did, you wouldn't put your fucking ski resort in his house.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Well, and there's lots of elk up there, by the way.
Oh,
Man.
I know.
I always think about it. Like we did tack up there a couple years ago, and I was shooting a piece of foam, at like 70, and there's a bull like walking 10 yards away from like another bull target. And I'm like, how do I get tags up here?
Oh, shit.
I know.
I've got a buddy with a big place up there. He doesn't have landowner tags, though. I asked him. But yeah, you can definitely make the argument that putting those ski runs in actually made better habitat in some ways for the elk and deer populations, because it opened up some of the forest and more grass and so on.
Sure.
Not that deer really eat grass, but they didn't do that shit because they care.
It's about making money.
Yeah, they won't let your family log anymore.
No. No. Well, let's go down and eat some elk. Okay. First, you have to tell me, where do they buy your book if they want to read your first one?
BraxtonMcCoy.com is the best place to go. And I sign all those, and I think there's only like 30 or 40 left. So if you want one, you probably ought to do it, because they're going to sell out for sure.
Awesome.
So,
and then they can find you IG and X and all those places, right?
Yeah. Okay. I'm pretty easy to find.
Okay, man. Awesome. Great conversation. Let's go eat some milk.
Okay. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.